A nurse cares for a frail, very thin, elderly woman in a coma, but discovers something that makes her cry and call the police. The automatic door of the clinic closed slowly behind Lucy. The clock read 11:07 p.m. It was a cold, early morning, the kind that makes you shrug your shoulders even though you're wearing a coat. The air outside was damp, and the wind seemed to be saying something she didn't want to hear. She adjusted her hair, clutched the clipboard against her chest, and walked down the almost empty hallway. The silence of the night was broken only by the sounds of the monitors, the dripping of the IV, and a television left on low in an empty reception area. Lucy knew that shift well. Night shifts were usually lonely with few patients and a lot of waiting. But that night, something made her stop just outside the door to Area 2. It was bed 4, and it was occupied. In the morning, Lucy had seen the bed empty, the sheets folded, no movement. But now the silhouette of someone was there, an elderly woman, very thin, almost disappearing inside the white sheet. Her skin was as thin as paper. Her thin grey hair was combed carelessly. She had a dull look, the kind that hasn't seen the world in a long time. But her eyes, though closed, seemed to have a story. Lucy approached silently, slowly moving the wheelchair to one side of the bed. She looked at the file hanging at the foot of the bed. It only had a temporary name, Patient X. Nothing else, no date of birth, no address, no emergency contact information, no family members, no clue as to who she was or where she came from. The heart monitor beeped at a steady rhythm. The woman was alive, but in a deep coma. Lucy frowned. That bothered her. It was common to receive unidentified patients, but something about this woman was different. It wasn't just that she was missing documents. It was as if she had no history. She looked back at the file, no medical notes beyond the basics. Nothing about who brought her in, no admission observations, just one line. She arrived at 3:42 p.m., left by a woman who said she was her granddaughter. Lucy swallowed hard. It was too strange. She carefully approached and touched the patient's hand with her fingers. The skin was cold and fragile, but it wasn't the temperature that made Lucy freeze. It was the sensation. A shiver ran up her spine, not of fear. It was something deeper, as if the body of that motionless woman had a cry trapped inside. A story locked in silence. Lucy took a deep breath and smelled alcohol, clean sheets, the sterile environment, but something didn't fit. There was a thick sadness in the air, like a silent lament stuck to the walls. She sat there for a few minutes looking at the woman without saying anything, just listening to the beeps of the machine, the sound of the air conditioning, and her own heart beating faster than normal. Little by little, Lucy felt her eyes fill with tears. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the woman's face, so quiet, so alone, as if the world had already forgotten her. She took the patient's hand again gently, as if trying to reach someone who was very far away. "You shouldn't be so alone," she whispered almost without a voice. And for a second, just a second, she had the impression that the old woman's breathing changed almost imperceptibly, but enough for Lucy to stop breathing and remain completely still. After that, nothing happened. Everything went back to normal. But something inside Lucy was no longer the same. Lucy left the space area and went to the reception desk. The girl on the afternoon shift was still there, finishing up the last entries. She had dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was pulled back haphazardly, and she was chewing on a cereal bar as if trying not to fall asleep. Lucy leaned over the counter and asked quietly, "Hey, excuse me, that new patient, the one in bed 4, do you know who brought her in?" The receptionist looked up, half surprised by the question. She blinked slowly as if trying to remember. "The old lady." "Uh-huh. She was a blonde woman, tall, I think. She came running in. She said she was her granddaughter. She was very nervous. She just handed in the incomplete form. She said she was in a hurry and left." Lucy pressed her lips together, feeling a knot in her stomach, and her name. "Did you write it down?" The receptionist shook her head guiltily. She said she would come back with the papers. She didn't come back, and I was here alone. There were a lot of people coming in at the time. I didn't write it down properly. Lucy sighed, staring at the floor for a few seconds. It was unbelievable. A woman could leave an elderly woman unconscious there and disappear, and no one would know who she was. But she left some number, some contact information. The girl looked through some papers, searched the computer, typed quickly, and shook her head. Nothing. It just says granddaughter. The phone number field is blank. Lucy felt a lump in her throat. That wasn't normal or fair. Do you remember anything else? Her clothes, the way she spoke. The receptionist thought for a moment. She was wearing a light-colored jacket, formal, as if she had come from work. But her face. I don't remember. Well, I just remember that she was in a hurry. A big hurry. Lucy rested her hands on the counter and took a deep breath. She felt like she was trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces, and no one else could see it. Not that I know of. She didn't even go through triage. She came straight to me. There was a silence, a strange, heavy silence. Lucy thanked her, but left with the feeling that her hands were tied. Going back to the area to look at that woman again made her chest tighten. How could someone disappear like that, leaving behind a whole life inside a sleeping body? That night, as she adjusted the patient's pillow, Lucy couldn't help herself and spoke softly, as if she were talking to someone who was awake. Who are you? What did they do to you? The old woman, as before, didn't react. But Lucy was already too involved to ignore it. On her second night on duty with the old lady, Lucy was more restless than usual. She felt something pulling her back to that bed, as if the sleeping woman were trying to say something without words. The other patients were stable. The early morning remained quiet, a calm that only made the silence louder. Lucy entered the room and pulled the sheet back carefully, arranging the pillows. As she cleaned the patient's arm with cotton and saline solution to prevent pressure sores, something caught her attention. It was out of the corner of her eye. Something different right there on her left shoulder. She frowned, lowered the sheet a little more, and then she saw it. It was a mark, not a cut or a bruise from a fall. It was something older, a type of scar that hadn't healed properly. The skin there was darker, as if burned, as if at some point it had been exposed to fire. It wasn't recent, but it wasn't just any mark either. Lucy ran her fingers slowly over it, barely touching it, respecting the fragile body of the woman. What happened here? She whispered to herself. The scar was shaped, half oval, irregular at the edges. It wasn't common, and the strangest thing was that it looked like it had been made by something specific. A hot object, a direct flame, an accident. Lucy didn't know, but she did know how to recognize when a wound brought more than just physical pain. This was more than just burned skin. It was one of those memories that the body cannot forget, even when the mind is already gone. She took out her cell phone carefully and took a photo, not out of curiosity, but because she felt that it had to be recorded, that perhaps it was important, and because deep down something in Lucy told her that this woman was not just an anonymous lady in a coma. She had a story, and that mark could be the beginning. She put her cell phone away and stood there looking at the exposed shoulder. The cold light from the lamp made the woman's skin look even more fragile. But in that weakness, there was something strong, a past that had not been erased, even though everything around her had tried to do so. Lucy adjusted the sheet again, covering the mark gently as if protecting a secret. Then she sat down next to the bed, took a deep breath, and looked at the patient's still face. I don't know what they did to you, but I promise I'll try to understand. Yes. The woman didn't answer, but in that silent room, Lucy swore she heard a soft sigh. The early morning fell heavily, one of those mornings when even the air feels thicker, as if everything were too quiet. Lucy was finishing writing down a patient's vitals in the next room when she felt it. It wasn't a loud noise, it was something subtle, faint, but it made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end instantly, a sound like a whisper. She stopped. She stood still for a few seconds, trying to listen again. Nothing. She took 2 slow steps toward the hallway. She looked toward the room with bed 4. Everything was off except for the blue light of the heart monitor blinking in the darkness. But then the soft sound came again, like a whisper carried on the air. A "you" without any clear form, without words. But it was a human sound. Lucy knew it. Her heart raced, not out of fear. It was something else, a kind of alert, as if her body sensed that something strange was happening. She entered the room slowly without turning on the light, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. Bed 4. The woman was motionless. Lucy approached silently, step by step, her eyes fixed on the patient's face. Her hand trembled a little, but she remained steady. She got very close. The monitor showed a steady, normal heartbeat. Her breathing was slow and deep as before, but the air in the room was different, colder, and the silence heavier. She brought her ear closer to the patient's mouth, almost without breathing, and then nothing, just the sound of the machines, the steady beeping, and the noise of her own breathing. Lucy took a step back. She felt a mixture of relief and frustration. She was sure she heard something. It wasn't her imagination. It couldn't be. She stood there for a few more minutes watching the woman. Her face was still calm, but there was something in the air, something that couldn't be explained by logic. It wasn't normal for a patient in a coma to make a sound, especially one that sounded like a call. Lucy looked around. The room was the same, nothing out of place, but inside her everything had changed, because from that moment on, she could no longer see that woman as someone who was just sleeping. It was as if, even though unconscious, she was trying to reach the outside world, asking for help perhaps, or just company. Lucy carefully placed her hand on the woman's arm. The skin was a little warmer than before, or maybe it was just her imagination. But in that silence filled with mystery, she felt the urge to stay there, sit down, take that hand, and wait because something wanted to be heard. And Lucy was ready to listen. The morning began like all the others, the smell of coffee coming from the dining room, the hurried footsteps of the first ones to arrive for their shift. The same sounds as always. The gurneys rolling, the beeps of the monitors, the murmurs in the hallways. Lucy walked slowly towards bed 4, hugging the board with papers against her chest, as if that would protect her from the weight she had been carrying since that first night. She looked more tired. She had slept little. Her eyes were burning, but there was something she couldn't leave behind. She had to see the lady. She had to be there. She entered the room in silence, as she always did. The patient was the same, eyes closed, body still, skin so pale that it looked like porcelain. The sound of the monitor continued rhythmically, like an insistent reminder that yes, there was still life inside. Lucy pulled up the stool, sat down next to the bed, and rested her elbows on the mattress. For a while she just looked, thinking of nothing, or perhaps thinking of everything. Then she took the patient's hand carefully. That fragile hand, full of little bones with spots from age. She held it as if it were something very precious, afraid of breaking it. She closed her eyes for a moment as if that simple gesture were a silent prayer. And then she felt it. A slight squeeze, very slight but real. Lucy opened her eyes immediately. She stood still, unable to believe it. She looked at the woman's hand, then at hers and felt it again. A tiny movement, an almost invisible effort from the woman's wrinkled fingers, squeezing her index finger. Weak, almost like a spasm. But it wasn't that. It was a gesture, a sign, a touch of life. "Oh, ma'am," Lucy whispered, her voice trembling. "Can you hear me?" Squeeze. Then silence. Lucy couldn't take it anymore. The tears started to flow, first one, then another, until it became a quiet, restrained but deep cry. She rested her forehead on the side of the bed, still holding that hand, not knowing what to do with all she was feeling. It wasn't just emotion. It was confirmation. That woman was in there, trapped somewhere between the silence and the world. But she was there. Lucy ran out into the hallway, called the doctor on duty, called another nurse. She was agitated, her eyes red and a lump in her throat. She moved her hand, squeezed my finger. The two colleagues looked at each other. One of them approached the bed, checked the signs and narrowed her eyes. It could have been a muscle reflex, Lucy. It happens. Lucy shook her head, annoyed. It wasn't a reflex. I felt it. She wanted to squeeze. It was a gesture. I know it. The other nurse touched her shoulder, trying to calm her down. Look, you're tired. You've been on duty for many days. Sometimes we feel things we want to feel. Lucy stood there with her eyes fixed on the patient. She felt anger and sadness at the same time. No one believed her, but she knew it was real. She sat back down next to the bed. She took the old woman's hand again carefully. The tears kept falling, but now with them came a certainty. I'm here. Yes, she said softly, even if no one believes it, I am with you. And she stayed there for hours, not expecting the hand to squeeze again, but hoping deep down that the old woman's heart would feel and know that even though everything was silent, she was no longer alone. That night, Lucy couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, turned off the light, and tried to close her eyes. But the image of the patient wouldn't leave her head. The way that hand gripped her finger, the faint but human warmth, was impossible to forget. Something inside her told her strongly, this woman has a story, and that story needs to be told. Lucy got out of bed at around 2:00 a.m. She put on a coat, tied her hair up in a bun, and left quietly. She took a taxi and went straight to the hospital. She didn't have a shift that night, but that didn't matter. When she entered through the side door of the clinic, the guard looked at her suspiciously. Extra shift, Lucy. She smiled a little. I just need to look at some old files quickly. He didn't say anything. He already knew how she was. He knew that when Lucy got fully involved with a patient, there were no schedules or rules. He went straight to the digital file. The room was empty, dark, lit only by the computer screen. He sat down, took a deep breath, and started searching. He didn't know exactly what to look for, but he wrote down what he had. Elderly woman, no documents, scar on her shoulder, comioma ossi admitted, no identification, nothing. So he decided to take another approach. He opened the police system, which only hospitals have access to, where reports on unidentified patients are registered. He searched for hours, name by name, photo by photo. The images were hard to look at. Missing people, people no one was looking for, people forgotten by the world. And then, almost at the end of the night, she found an old file from 9 years ago. The photo looked yellowed, as if time had also passed there. The name Carmen Rivers. Lucy froze for a moment. She looked through as she looked closely at the photo, at the woman's eyes. Those eyes, although younger, although more alive, were the same. A deep, sad look, like someone carrying a lot of pain. She read the report. Woman missing under unclear circumstances. Approximate age, 72 years old. Last known location, Colonia Las Pedras. Neighbors say she disappeared suddenly. No news since then. Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. Carmen Rivers. That name resonated strongly within her. There was something right about that connection. The age matched. The face, although changed by time, was the same. But what hurt the most was the void in the records. No one had looked for her since. No updates, no visits, nothing. She placed her hand on the screen as if she wanted to touch that face frozen in time. It's you, isn't it? The doubt still lingered, but inside Lucy's chest there was no longer any room for denial. Something much stronger than a mere coincidence had led her there. And at that moment, alone in the dark room, her face illuminated by the cold light of the monitor, Lucy cried. Because if that was true, then that forgotten woman in Bedford had a name. She had a story. She had once been loved by someone, and now it was time to find the rest of the truth. The next day, Lucy took an early bus. She carried the printed photo of Carmen carefully folded in her coat pocket. She spent the entire trip staring out the window, her heart beating fast. She had managed, with the help of an old nurse, to get the name of the police officer who had written the report 9 years ago. Ramirez. He was now retired. He lived in a modest neighborhood far from the city, on a street of small houses with low fences. When Lucy knocked on the door, he opened it himself. He was wearing flip-flops and a plaid shirt and was unshaven. He looked at her suspiciously. Yes. Lucy took a deep breath and showed him the folded photo. Are you Ramirez? The police officer who reported Carmen Rivers' disappearance. He opened his eyes in surprise, remained silent, and took the photo from her hands as if he were touching a memory he hadn't seen in a long time. He looked at her for a few seconds until he sat down slowly on a wooden chair on the terrace. She was my neighbor, he said quietly, clutching the photo between his fingers. She lived alone after her children left. She disappeared from one day to the next. She didn't leave a note, not a clue, nothing. Lucy sat down next to him, giving him time. Ramirez seemed lost in the past. His eyes were fixed on the photo. Have you heard from her? Lucy replied calmly. Maybe, but I'm still trying to understand. He nodded thoughtfully. Carmen was a good woman, simple, quiet, but you could tell she was in pain. After her husband died, she became even more withdrawn. And the children. Oh, what about the children? Lucy asked carefully. Ramirez took a moment to answer, then looked at her directly. She had two, Julian, the oldest, and Stephen, the youngest. The oldest had a fight with her when he was still young. They said they had a very big fight, that he accused his mother of things, but no one knew exactly what. Lucy frowned, and the youngest, Ramirez, looked down. His voice became lower, sadder. Stephen disappeared when he was still a child. He was about 10 years old, maybe younger. One day he stopped going to school. No one ever saw him again. His mother said he had gone to live with some relatives, but the neighbors started talking. Talking about what? Ramirez sighed as if he were carrying an old weight that hadn't gone anywhere, that had escaped, or that someone had taken it away. They even talked about abuse, something ugly that happened in that house, but nothing was ever proven, and Carmen never spoke of her son again. Lucy swallowed hard. Ramirez looked at her again. She was a quiet woman, but her gaze said it all. It was pain, pure pain, as if she carried a ghost inside her. The two remained silent. The wind blew gently, stirring the dry leaves in the yard, and Lucy was sure. There was much more than a woman in a coma. There was a broken family, buried secrets, and a past that still hurt. Even though many years had passed, she thanked him, got up, but before leaving, Ramirez grabbed her arm firmly with determination. If it's her, please let me know. Lucy could only nod and left with her eyes full of tears. She knew the search was just beginning, but now she was no longer alone. Lucy returned to the clinic with her body present, but her mind far away. What she had heard from Ramirez sounded like an old voice trapped in a dark hallway. The names, the children, the disappearance. Every part of the story was like a piece of glass, and now she had to find the complete mirror. The sun was setting when he passed by reception. He waved hello. He went straight down the hall to room 4. It was empty, silent as always. He pushed the door carefully and went in. The woman was still there, lying down, motionless, but with that same peaceful expression that Lucy no longer saw as empty. She saw it as a silent battlefield, a place where memories fought to survive. She went to fix the sheet, carefully folding the corner, and raised the pillow a little. When she bent down to pick up a tissue that had fallen on the floor, she saw something strange, half hidden under the bed. A piece of torn paper, old and crumpled. Lucy bent down slowly and carefully pulled out the paper. It was a page from an old notebook with slightly faded ink and shaky handwriting, but clearly that of a woman. It looked as if it had been written in a hurry or out of fear. The page was torn in half. Some words were illegible, as if someone had torn it out in anger. But there was one complete sentence, and it was impossible not to feel its power. Forgive me, son. Lucy felt her throat close up. She remained there on her knees on the floor, holding the paper as if it were a treasure. The handwriting trembled on the page, and inside her as well. She stood up, looked around as if searching for an explanation. She went into the hallway, called a security technician, and asked for the videos from the cameras in that area. The handwriting trembled on the page, and inside her as well. She got up, looked around as if searching for an explanation. She went into the hallway, called a security technician, and asked for the videos from the cameras in that area. She wanted to know if anyone had entered the room. Maybe someone left the paper. Maybe someone broke into the room. That had to be it. Hours later, the technician returned with the report. Lucy, no one went in. I checked all the cameras since yesterday. Nothing, just you. She remained silent. She returned to the room with slow steps, the letter in her hands. The phrase in her mind, "Forgive me, son." She sat next to the patient, looked at her face for a few minutes, and whispered with her eyes filled with tears. This was you, wasn't it? The woman did not respond. The heart monitor continued to mark her heartbeats like background music that never stops. But deep down, Lucy knew it was a cry from within. A memory that could no longer remain trapped. An apology that crossed the silence time and reached her like a whisper from the heart. And in that moment, alone in that cold room, Lucy understood the truth. She was trying to slowly escape the pain, the guilt, the love that still remained in some corner of that forgotten story. Lucy held the letter folded so carefully that it seemed like she was carrying a piece of someone's soul. The paper was yellowed, fragile, as if it would fall apart between her fingers. And that phrase would not leave her head. Forgive me, son. It was more than a sentence. It was a plea, a relief, an open wound that, although silent, screamed. The next morning, Lucy left early with the intention of taking the letter to the police station. She walked to the bus stop with the letter in her coat pocket. Protected inside an envelope, she managed to cross the street but stopped halfway across the sidewalk. She stood there, feeling the wind on her face, the horns in the distance, and a doubt in her chest. Something inside her saying, "Wait." It was as if Carmen herself, or whoever that woman was asking for silence. Not yet. It's not time yet. It wasn't fear or doubt. It was a strong feeling, almost as if she could touch it, that the story wasn't complete yet, and that delivering the letter now would be like closing a book halfway through. Lucy returned. That night she tried to sleep, but her sleep was heavy, strange, and with it came dreams. Everything was dark. She was walking down a cold, damp hallway with stained walls. The sound of her own footsteps echoed as if she were alone in a forgotten world. At the end of the hallway there was a door, and behind it a voice, a weak, tired woman's voice. "Help, my son." Lucy woke up with her face wet. She had been crying in her sleep. She sat up in bed trying to understand what that was. Her heart was beating fast, and she could still hear the phrase in her ear, as if someone had said it right there next to her. The following night, she passed the same hallway again. The same door, the same phrase, "Help my son." It was always the same, and at the same time, getting louder and louder, Lucy began to feel that this was not just a dream. It was a message, a plea that came from a place deeper than thought. She began to write everything down in a notebook, the feelings, the words, the details. She wanted to understand. She needed to understand, because now it was no longer just about discovering who that woman was. It was about finding someone lost, someone who needed to be remembered. And Lucy knew it. The answer was close, but still hidden in the darkness. At the end of a cloudy afternoon, when the sunlight was no longer streaming through the windows with such force, Lucy heard quick footsteps coming from the reception area. She was in the break room drinking a warm coffee and mentally reviewing everything that had happened. She still felt the weight of her dreams, the weariness in her soul, her heart always alert. She was called on the intercom by the receptionist in a quiet voice. "Lucy, there's a lady here who wants to talk to you." She says she's the granddaughter of the patient in bed 4. Lucy felt a chill. The granddaughter now walked up to the reception desk and saw a woman in her 60s, well-dressed, wearing a light blouse, her hair pinned back, light makeup, but her face tense, her gaze restless, her hands constantly moving. "Are you the nurse in charge?" she asked without smiling, getting straight to the point. Lucy nodded. "Yes, how can I help you?" The woman did not respond immediately. She looked around as if she didn't want anyone to hear her. Then she approached and spoke quietly but firmly. "I'm the granddaughter of the lady who's in the hospital. I came to sort this out. I don't want her to stay hooked up to those machines. She's not going to wake up. She's suffering for no reason." Lucy felt a lump in her throat and took a deep breath. She didn't respond right away, just looked at her. That didn't seem like pain, it seemed like urgency. "Did you bring any documents?" she asked calmly. The woman hesitated for a second. Then she took a wrinkled copy of what appeared to be an ID card out of her bag. She showed it to Lucy without letting her touch it. "This is just a formality, right? I want them to disconnect the machines. They should have done it already. You are prolonging suffering that no longer makes sense." Lucy, her heart pounding, clutched her badge tightly. She tried to keep her voice steady even though she felt something moving inside her. "You are asking to disconnect the life support of someone who until now no one knew who they were. We are still reviewing the information. That takes time." The woman got angry, slammed her bag against her leg, looked at her watch and snorted. "Time? It's been over a week and I can't keep coming here all the time. I can't wait for you to check. My grandmother didn't want this." She hated hospitals. Lucy looked her in the eyes. Something wasn't right. The coldness, the hurry, the way she talked about the lady as if she were a nuisance, a task that had to be finished. "The doctor in charge will have to evaluate her, and I honestly can't make any decisions right now." The woman walked away clearly upset, but before leaving she turned around with contained rage. "I just want you to know that if she's still like this, it's because you're stopping something that should have already ended." Lucy didn't respond, just watched her walk away, her heels clicking loudly on the floor, her body tense. As soon as she disappeared through the door, Lucy sat down on one of the benches in the reception area. She rested her head against the wall, her eyes burning. Something about that visit didn't make sense. The woman claimed to be the granddaughter, but she spoke like someone who just wanted to get rid of a problem, like someone in a hurry to erase a story. Lucy knew it. There was something strange, and now more than ever, she wasn't going to leave that woman alone. Lucy spent the rest of her shift with her head spinning. The woman's words kept echoing in her mind, mixed with an uneasiness that wouldn't go away. Something was wrong, very wrong. The look in her eyes, the coldness with which she spoke of her supposed grandmother, the insistence on disconnecting the machines, none of it was normal. As soon as her shift ended, Lucy went straight to the administrative office. She asked for access to the record system. It wasn't common for a nurse to do that, but she didn't ask for permission. She needed to know. She needed to understand who this woman was, who had suddenly appeared claiming to be Carmen's granddaughter. She typed in the name that she had given. She waited, and then nothing. No match, no record. No one with that name related to the patient, either in the clinic system or in the identity database. It hit her in the stomach. Lucy searched again, tried variations, other last names, even nicknames. Nothing. That woman did not exist. Her blood ran cold. That fragile woman in a coma had been left there by someone who invented an identity and now wanted her to die in silence. Lucy took out her cell phone and called the only name she trusted at that moment. "Ramirez, I need your help. The name of the supposed granddaughter is fake, and there's something very strange about all this." That same afternoon, Ramirez arrived at the clinic with a firm voice. Like someone who, although retired, still knew how to investigate. She gave him a photo of the woman. It was from an old security camera, blurry, but it would do. Ramirez looked at it carefully. "That woman is not unknown to me. She disappeared for 2 days, and when she returned, Lucy was in the dining room almost without strength. He went in, sat down in front of her, and said in a low voice, "I know who she is. Marble Lopez. She's Julian Rivers' wife." Lucy opened her eyes wide. She felt a punch in the chest. Julian, Carmen's eldest son. Ramirez nodded. "Nothing I'm about to say has been officially proven, but I found out from reliable sources, neighbors, and people I paid. She falsified documents, pretended to be Carmen's granddaughter. She had Carmen admitted here as if she were a stranger. And worst of all, she kept her hidden for months in her house, in a small room in the back. Alone, locked up, away from everything." Lucy covered her mouth with her hand as if trying to hold back tears. She felt nauseous. And her husband, did he know? Ramirez lowered his gaze. Yes, he knew. They said he was the one who ordered it. He said it was better than seeing her die at home, that he didn't want to deal with it anymore. Lucy closed her eyes for a moment. She felt the world spinning. Now everything made sense. The old woman's silence, the hidden fear, the letter on the floor, and in the midst of it all, a cruel abandonment of blood, of family, of those she was supposed to take care of. Lucy looked at Ramirez with tears in her eyes. They left her like trash. Those who were supposed to protect her. Ramirez held her hand firmly. "But you gave her a name, a time, an opportunity." Lucy didn't answer. She just cried silently with her head down, because at that moment more than ever, she knew that Carmen had come back to life thanks to the hands of someone who decided not to close eyes. Lucy walked down the clinic hallway with heavy steps, as if the floor had become harder overnight. Her head hurt, her heart was tight. It was hard to accept. The same woman who had come in hurriedly, coldly, asking to disconnect the machines, was the one who had hidden Carmen. She had made her disappear from the world as if she were an old object with no value. As soon as Ramirez confirmed everything, she didn't hesitate. She called the police directly. There is evidence, a false name. Abandonment of a helpless person, attempted fraud. That woman can't go free. Lucy just watched, unable to say a word. She stood there, leaning against the wall of the nursing room, listening to the phone being hung up. The sound of Ramirez's pen, writing on paper. Everything felt distant, as if she were watching from outside. But what hurt the most was Carmen's face. How much she had fallen locked up, erased from the world, and no one did anything. Hours later, the police entered the house. Julian was gone. Maribel was arrested. She tried to justify herself. She tried to say that she was just fixing a family problem, but the evidence was stronger. The false identity, the cameras, the letter, and worst of all, Carmen's silence. In her statement to the police, Maribel let her guard down. Her son, Julian, he knew. He told me to have her committed. He said it was better than seeing her die at home. He didn't want to deal with it anymore. Ramirez, who was there, froze. He wrote calmly. Julian Rivers looked at Lucy with eyes steady but filled with tears. She could only whisper her own son's name. The place fell silent, thick, heavy. There, at that moment, it became clear. The abandonment was not an oversight. It was a planned, cold decision. Lucy left the police station with red eyes, but with a new feeling in her chest. She knew that Carmen was no longer invisible, that now the world had heard her voice, even if it was in silence. And that justice, though late, had finally begun to arrive. Lucy couldn't get the name, Maribel said during her testimony, out of her head. Julian, the eldest son, the same one who turned his back on his mother, the same one who allowed all of this to happen. But there was another absence in the story, even more painful. Stephen, the youngest son, the one who had been missing for years. 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 The one who had been Julian, the eldest son. The same one who turned his back on his mother. the same one who allowed all of this to happen. But there was another absence in the story. Even more painful, Stephen, the youngest son, the one who had disappeared in childhood, the same name that Ramirez mentioned like a ghost lost in time. Lucy knew she had to try. She knew it might be impossible, but something inside her told her she couldn't stop there. With Ramirez's help, she got an old address where Carmen's family had lived decades ago. It was in a forgotten neighborhood far from downtown, where the streets were dirt and wires hung from the poles casting shadows on the short fences. Lucy took the bus, then walked until she found a small store. She showed them Jim and Stephen's photo. It was a young version taken from the missing person report. The man at the counter looked at her for a moment, scratched his beard. That one's hard to tell, but those eyes. I think I saw something like that in a homeless man in the plaza near the little church. He's always sitting in the same corner, silent. A skinny man who looks sick doesn't talk to anyone. Lucy thanked him and went there. The square was small with broken benches, a fountain without water, and some large trees twisted by time. She walked slowly, her heart tight with every step. She looked at the faces of the men who were there, most of them with plastic bags, old blankets, a lost look in their eyes, invisible to the world. And then she saw him in a corner near a tree trunk. A man sitting hunched over in torn clothes, his feet bare, and his gaze empty. He didn't raise his head. He didn't ask for anything. He just was there still. Lucy approached slowly. Her heart was beating like a drum in her chest. When she was in front of him, she knelt down carefully and took the old photo of Carmen out of her pocket. She held it out with trembling hands. "Sir, please, can you see this?" The man took a while. Then he raised his eyes. Deep eyes, like someone who had seen more than he should have, and when he saw the photo, he trembled a little. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Lucy whispered, "Her name was Carmen, Carmen Rivers. She had 2 children. One was named Stephen." The man closed his eyes, as if he heard a name he hadn't heard in decades, and then, in a hoarse voice, Devil murmured, "Mom." Lucy felt a lump in her throat. It was him, Stephen. She didn't need anything else, no proof or paper. It was him. The way he spoke, the tremor in his eyes, his reaction to the photo. He was a lost son, wounded by time, forgotten by everyone. She took his hand gently. It was dirty, cold, but human. "Do you want to come with me?" He didn't answer, just bowed his head as if he wanted to, but didn't know if he could. Lucy wiped away a tear and said, "Sign it with all the care in the world. Your mother is still alive." Stephen looked up again, and for the first time there was a crack in that emptiness, as if something inside him was beginning to awaken. Lucy knew she couldn't rush anything. Stephen was there physically, but inside he was still like a wounded child, hidden in a dark corner of his memory. She sat next to him for days, returning to the square every afternoon with a folded blanket under her arm, a bag of simple food, and the same tone of voice. Calm, patient. The first day he barely looked at her. He accepted the sandwich with trembling hands and ate it in silence without thanks or refusal. The second day she brought a small bottle of juice. He took it and took a sip. The third day she brought hot soup in a plastic container and a small radio. "Do you like music?" He didn't answer but looked at the radio. His eyes lingered a second longer than normal, and so it went day after day, Lucy getting closer. Not with questions, but with her presence, without forcing anything, just being there, like someone caring for a flower that had almost dried up. One afternoon the sky was cloudy and the wind smelled like rain. Lucy sat on the same bench as always, with her bag on her legs. He was already sitting there at the foot of the tree, as if waiting. She started a light conversation. She talked about a patient's little dog and some children she saw playing on the road. He listened with his head down, but he listened. And suddenly, out of nowhere, in a hoarse voice, almost as if he were talking to himself, he said, "My mum had a scar on her shoulder." Lucy froze. She turned slowly toward him, not wanting to scare him, not wanting to make a scene, just breathing deeply and asking as carefully as she could, "What kind of scar?" Stephen looked at the ground, his eyes filling with tears, his hands shaking, and he replied almost in a whisper, like a burn but old. "She never talked about it. Something my dad did to her." Lucy felt her eyes fill with tears. Her heart was beating so hard that it hurt. That detail, that mark, the same one she had seen, the same one that made her understand that this woman had a story that needed to be told. With her hands shaking, she took the photo she had been carrying since the beginning out of her pocket. It was worn, bent at the corners, but Carmen's face was still there, steady. Stephen looked at it for just a second, and it was as if time had opened a crack. He began to cry, first silently, then with soft sobs, as if he were swallowing the scream inside. He held the photo with his dirty fingers as if it were made of glass and whispered through his tears. "Mum," Lucy said nothing, just put her hand on his shoulder with all the love in the world. And in that moment, none of it mattered anymore. The lost time, the years of silence, the hidden pain. What mattered was that a son had just remembered that he still had a mother. The next day, very early, Lucy arrived at the square with an extra coat in her hands and a pair of new sandals. Stephen was already there, sitting as usual with his gaze lost among the trees. But this time, he seemed to be waiting. She approached slowly, sat down next to him, and said in a low voice, "She's alive, Stephen. She's still waiting for you." He didn't respond immediately. He took the coat, put it on slowly without looking at her. His eyes filled up again. He took a deep, heavy breath. Lucy waited, then spoke again, her voice almost breaking. "Come with me just to see her. You don't have to say anything. Just see her." Stephen trembled, his shoulders really shook, his hands were sweaty. He closed his eyes tightly as if fighting an old pain. "What if she hates me?" Lucy was silent for a moment, then placed her hand on his and replied with her heart. "A mother's love is never forgotten, not in silence or in a coma. She won't hate you. She'll feel you." He swallowed, took a deep breath, and without saying another word, got up. On the way to the clinic, Stephen didn't speak, but his body said it all. His steps were short, his chest tight, as if every meter pulled him back to the past. He wanted to forget. Lucy walked beside him the whole time in silence, just being there. When they arrived, she took him straight to the area where Carmen was. The hallway was quiet, smelling of alcohol and dimly lit. Stephen stood in front of the door, unable to take the first step. Lucy whispered, "She's there just as you remember her." He took a deep breath, took 2 steps inside, and stopped. The room was silent with the heart monitor ticking slowly. Carmen remained motionless, but with the same peace on her face, as if she knew something good was about to happen. Stephen approached slowly, his eyes wide open, his body tense. When he was less than a meter away from her, he fell to his knees. There, on the cold floor of that room, he broke down. He put his forehead on the mattress, cried like a child, and with a broken voice in a whisper that seemed to come from far away, he said, "I didn't know. Do you forgive me, Mom?" Lucy stood there near the door in silence, her heart aching, and in that moment there were no more questions, only an apology that crossed time. Silence, pain, a son reunited with his mother. Although she still couldn't answer, Stephen remained on his knees, his forehead pressed against the edge of the bed, his shoulders shaking from crying so hard. His hand clutched his mother's tightly, as if he also wanted to hold on to the time he had lost, the words he had not said, the hugs he had never given. The room was silent. But now it was a different kind of silence, heavy, full of emotion, as if the very air were holding its breath. And then it happened, a slight, almost invisible movement. But Lucy saw it. Carmen's eyes moved. She blinked slowly, as if waking up from a very long dream. Lucy rushed over, frightened. "Stephen, look." He raised his head, his eyes wide open. The heart monitor began to beep faster. The heartbeat was rising. A continuous VIP sounded. It was the alarm. The doctors rushed in. One of them shouted, "She's reacting!" But Stephen couldn't hear anything. He could only see his mother's face. Those eyes, for the first time in so many years, were half open, and for a moment they looked directly at him. "Mom, it's me. It's me, your son. You, Stephen." His voice came out shaky, broken, and his mother's hand squeezed his. Weak but steady, Lucy held back her tears. The doctors checked his vital signs, gave orders, but everything around them seemed to stop because at that moment all that mattered was that reunion. Carmen's eyes opened a little wider. She looked at Stephen with a sweet, almost childlike gaze, and with a dry mouth, almost without strength, she whispered, "Thank you, my son." A tear rolled down the corner of her eye. Slowly, alone, and then slowly, she closed her eyes again. The monitors stabilized. The doctors signaled that everything was under control, but Lucy was no longer listening to anyone. She looked at Stephen, still kneeling silently, his forehead pressed against his mother's hand. He was crying like a child who had finally been seen, and Carmen's face was no longer the same. There was peace there. For the first time since the day she entered that nameless clinic with no history, Carmen appeared at peace because now she was no longer alone. Lucy stood still for a few seconds, looking at the scene in front of her, as if the world had stopped in time. Stephen's hand was still holding his mother's. His eyes were red and wet, but now there was something different in them. It wasn't just pain, it was a kind of relief, an old relief that one keeps in one's heart all one's life. Waiting just a moment to leave, she approached slowly, knelt down beside him, and with all the care in the world hugged Stephen's shoulders tightly. She felt his body tremble against hers as if he had finally found a safe place. As if after all this time someone had said to him, "You matter." Lucy rested her forehead on his shoulder and spoke in a broken voice very softly, as if she were speaking to his soul. "She heard you, Stephen. She heard you." He didn't answer right away. He just cried more. But now it was a different kind of crying. It wasn't from pain. It was from finding someone. From forgiveness. From a love that, even though it had been hurt by time, was still there. Lucy pulled away a little to look him in the eyes, and that's when he got up still on his knees and leaned over the bed. He gently touched his mother's face with a tenderness that seemed to come from childhood, from a time when it was just him and her in the world. Then, with infinite care, he placed his lips on Carmen's wrinkled forehead, a simple kiss, but full of everything that had never been said. At that moment, he was no longer the forgotten man in the square, nor the child lost in time. Stephen was finally a present son, and Carmen was a mother rediscovered. Lucy took a deep breath and closed her eyes because she knew that there in that silent room, something sacred had just happened. The days passed slowly. Every morning was a victory. The room with bed number 4, which had previously been filled with silence and machines, now smelled of flowers. There were soft footsteps, and most importantly, there was hope. Carmen gradually began to open her eyes for longer periods of time, move her hands, and try to speak. The doctors looked at each other almost in disbelief. It was like seeing a miracle happening in front of them. Silently, Lucy didn't leave, even when it wasn't her shift. She would go. She brought flowers, arranged the pillows, wiped the sweat from Carmen's forehead with a damp cloth, and every day she said, "You're doing very well, Donna Carmen." One day at a time, Carmen still didn't speak, but her eyes said it all. They followed Lucy around the room, smiling when she came in, and sometimes they cried silently, as if giving thanks without using words. Until one Sunday morning, while Lucy was changing the water in the vest, she heard a faint voice, very faint but clear. "Lucy." She turned around immediately, her heart beating fast. She ran to the bed. Carmen's eyes were wide open with a new sparkle, a sparkle that mixed strength and fragility. Lucy approached her and took her hand carefully. "Hello, I'm here." Carmen took a deep breath with effort. Then, with a slight smile, she whispered, "You're an angel." Lucy couldn't help it. The tears came pouring out, and she didn't try to stop them. She rested her forehead on the patient's chest, holding back her emotions with both hands. Me, Donna Carmen, I only did the right thing. But Carmen insisted, slowly raising her hand with difficulty and touching Lucy's face. The tips of her wrinkled fingers brushed her cheek as if to express gratitude with the simplest gesture in the world. It was a gentle touch, but full of everything: gratitude, relief, life. And in that moment, inside that room filled with light, Lucy felt that all the effort, all the struggle, all the pain had been worth it because Carmen had returned. The mornings at the clinic began to have a new sound, a sweet, familiar sound full of beautiful nostalgia. Because every day, without fail, Stephen arrived, his hair combed as best he could, wearing a clean shirt, looking clearer than before, and always carrying something in his hands. Something. A flower picked from the park, a drawing made by a neighbor's little girl, or just a sweet roll wrapped with love. He entered the room with slow but firm steps, and when Carmen saw him, her eyes sparkled as if they recognized the child who once grabbed her skirt, asking to be picked up. "Hello, Mom," he said in a calm voice, sitting down next to the bed. "Today brought you a story." And he would begin. He would tell her about the time he fell off his bike, and she made him some bulldog tea for the pain while she sang Cucurucu Paloma in the kitchen as she made bread with milk, and how he would hide in the closet just to see if she would look for him. And she would laugh. She would laugh with her eyes. Sometimes she closed her eyes, but her lips curved into a smile so light, so peaceful, that it seemed like a dream. "Mom, do you remember when we made a little house out of sheets in the living room, and you pretended it was the sky?" Carmen shook her head very gently, and her eyes filled with tears. He also sang in a hoarse, shy voice, but full of truth. "Sun, little sun, warm me up a little." And he would stop laughing. I always got that part wrong, didn't I? Lucy, who was watching from afar, sometimes hiding behind the half-open door, also smiled. It was like seeing time slowly coming back, as if every word, every memory that Stephen brought back pulled Carmen back home. In those moments, there was no pain. There was no past, only him existed now. A mother listening to her son's voice, a son rediscovering a love that never went away. And in those little moments in that little hospital room, the outside world seemed to stop because inside there was healing, there was life, there was reunion. It was a clear morning, one of those mornings when the sky looks bluer than usual. Lucy was in the kitchen of the clinic, stirring her coffee distractedly, her mind still on Carmen's smiling eyes from the day before when the receptionist came in hurriedly. "Lucy, there's a letter for you. There's no sender." She took the white envelope carefully. It was sealed, plain, with no name, no stamp. Her heart raced without her knowing why. She returned to the break room and opened it with steady hands, but her chest was heaving. Inside was a handwritten note in large letters, somewhat crooked, but the content was like a punch in the stomach. "I wasn't a man who could take care of you or prevent what my wife did. I kept quiet. I hid. I failed as a son. But I swear I'm going to turn myself in. She didn't deserve this. Thank you for giving her what I took away from her. Signed, Julian Rivers." Lucy placed the letter on her lap and brought her hands to her face. She stayed like that for a while, silent, just feeling the pain of this man who finally admitted that he had kept quiet the cowardice of so many years, but also the courage to admit it, to accept it, to not run away anymore. Hours later, Ramirez arrived at the clinic. She could hardly speak. She just showed him the paper. He read it in silence. He took a deep breath. He gave himself up. It was this morning. He went into the police station alone and told them everything. He's going to answer for omission and negligence. But he didn't run away. Lucy nodded with tears in her eyes. Then he understood. Ramirez looked at her calmly. He understood late, but he understood the letter was still there on the table, and Lucy knew it didn't erase what had happened. But that piece of paper carried more than guilt. It carried the weight of true regret, and for Carmen, that was also justice. The square was quiet that morning. The sun shone softly through the trees. The air was warm, and the sound of birds mingled with the rustling of dry leaves on the ground. It was as if the world was at peace for a few minutes, and there, in the middle of that peaceful landscape, she came, Carmen, sitting in a wheelchair, covered with a thin shawl, her face lifted towards the sky, her eyes half closed, enjoying every second of the light. Her grey hair was lovingly combed, and she held a colourful handkerchief in her hands that she never let go of. Stephen pushed the wheelchair carefully. His steps were slow, his face calm. He walked as if he were carrying a treasure. He spoke softly, telling simple things. "Look at that little bird over there, Mom. Just like the one that used to sit on the windowsill in our kitchen." She laughed softly, squeezed his hand, and sometimes whispered a short but affectionate reply. Lucy watched them from afar, sitting on a bench in the square, her heart beating calmly, her chest full, her smile quiet but complete. Seeing those two together was more than a happy ending. It was a rebirth, a bond reunited, a soul that shone again. Ramirez arrived quietly, sat down next to her, looked at the same scene, and remained silent for a few seconds. Then, in a low voice, almost like a secret, he commented, "Justice is slow, but it comes." Lucy looked at him and nodded. But before she could respond, who spoke? It was Stephen. He had been listening, and with tears in his eyes, he pushed the chair forward and said, "The greatest justice was that she forgave me." Carmen, with her eyes fixed on the sky, squeezed her son's hand again, and in that moment, there in that ordinary square, with the sun slowly warming them, the world seemed more beautiful. Because in the midst of so much pain, abandonment and silence, a love was born that resisted everything, a love that triumphed. Now tell me, what would you do in Lucy's place? Would you have made it to the end? Or in Stephen's place, would you have had the courage to ask for forgiveness after so many years? Write it here in the comments. I really want to know how this story made you feel. And don't forget to click the bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. There are many more real, powerful human stories to come. And hey, if this one made you feel something, click now on the video that's appearing on the screen. It's another heart-touching story that has already made many people cry and think about their whole lives. I'll be waiting for you.